My name is Cassidy. I am 32 years old, and I was on an Amtrak train to New York when I helped an elderly woman who had dropped her reading glasses and scattered half her tote bag across the aisle floor. She told me she had spent 30 years teaching civics at a public high school in Virginia. She insisted on accompanying me to the courthouse the following morning. My husband laughed out loud when he saw her shuffling through the courthouse corridor beside me in her sensible shoes. 17 minutes after we sat down, the judge stood up so fast he knocked over his water glass, and my husband's attorney grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. Before I get to that part, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if someone has ever completely underestimated what you were capable of, hit like and subscribe, because this one is for you. I boarded the 6:47 Express out of Philadelphia's 30th Street station on a Thursday evening in early March. The train car smelled like stale coffee and rain-damp coats, and I had a window seat I hadn't asked for, a carry-on bag stuffed mostly with documents, and a knot behind my sternum that had been sitting there for 11 days. That was exactly how long it had been since my husband Fletcher filed for sole custody of our daughter. Our daughter was 6. She had just lost her second front tooth and had informed me with complete seriousness that the tooth fairy's $2 rate was not keeping up with inflation. She was the funniest person I had ever met in my life, and Fletcher intended to take her from me entirely. His court filing said I was emotionally unstable. It said I had a documented history of volatile behavior that posed a risk to our child's development. It cited a psychiatric evaluation I had never undergone, signed by a physician I had never seen, from a practice I had never visited. I knew the report was forged within 90 seconds of reading it. The way you know a counterfeit bill when you have spent years handling real ones. I work as a senior fraud investigator for one of the largest health insurance companies in the country. For 8 years I have audited false claims, traced fraudulent billing schemes, and followed money through shell companies and dummy providers. Fabricated clinical documentation has a particular texture to it. Wrong rhythms, borrowed language, dates that don't sequence correctly. That psychiatric report had every one of those tells. What Fletcher had never once taken seriously during our entire marriage was exactly what I did every day. I was staring at the lights of the Trenton rail yard sliding past my window when the woman in the aisle seat across from me let out a small, startled sound. She had reached for her tote bag and misjudged the handle. The bag swung off the seat and hit the floor hard, and everything inside it fanned across the narrow aisle. A crossword puzzle book, a green thermos, a pack of tissues, and a thick accordion folder that burst open and sent papers sliding under 4 rows of seats in both directions. Nobody moved. 3 people glanced over and went back to their phones. I unbuckled and got down on my hands and knees without thinking about it. That's just what you do when someone elderly is struggling and the rest of the car has decided it isn't their problem. I gathered the thermos and the crossword book first, then started working through the papers. They were dense, judicial correspondence, procedural memoranda, formal letterhead from agencies I recognized. Not the papers of a retired schoolteacher. I stacked them quickly without examining them, but a single page near my knee caught my eye before I could stop it. It was a formal memorandum regarding a misconduct complaint review, and, in the margin, someone had written a dense series of procedural annotations in deliberate, confident handwriting. I stacked it with the rest and handed everything back without comment. "Thank you so much," the woman said. She was adjusting her wire-framed glasses, which she had retrieved herself from under the seat. Silver hair, cut practical and short, a posture that had nothing apologetic about it. I have become clumsy in ways I refuse to accept. I told her it happened to everyone. She asked where I was headed, and I gave her the short version. New York, custody hearing tomorrow morning, without meaning to say that much. There is something about trains at night that makes a person talk. She introduced herself as Miriam, retired schoolteacher, civics mostly, she said, with an emphasis I did not think to question. She asked what I did for work. When I explained, insurance fraud investigation, forensic billing analysis, following money through fraudulent systems, she did not offer the polite nod most people give before changing the subject. She tilted her head and asked, genuinely, how you learn to find money that someone is trying to hide. You learn what normal looks like, I told her. And then you notice everything that isn't. We shared a cab from Penn Station to the hotel district. By the time we reached my stop, Miriam had quietly asked whether I had retained legal counsel for the morning. When I told her I couldn't afford to match what Fletcher had spent, that he'd hired a man named Gavin Ridley, one of the most aggressive family law attorneys in the city, and that Ridley was a close personal friend of the judge presiding over our case, she was silent for a moment. "I will come with you," she said, as support. I told her that was genuinely kind but completely unnecessary. She came anyway. That night I did not sleep. I opened my laptop at the desk in my hotel room and did what I always do when something is wrong. I followed the money. I had started building a file on Fletcher 6 weeks earlier, not out of spite, but out of the same instinct that has never once failed me at work. When our joint investment account started showing structured transfers in the fall, transfers sized just under the automatic federal reporting thresholds, I recognized the pattern immediately. I had flagged identical structures in 3 separate fraud cases that year alone. What I found over the next 4 hours was careful and damning. Fletcher had registered a Delaware LLC the previous January, a property consulting entity, with no employees, no physical address, and no legitimate revenue stream. He had been moving money into it from our joint accounts in increments, and the LLC had used those funds to pay for a luxury apartment in Midtown. The lease was in his girlfriend's name, Daphne, 24 years old, met at some rooftop event while we were still married. But the forged psychiatric report was the part that made my hands go cold. I ran the provider license number cited in the document header through the National Provider Index, which is a public federal database I access every week for work. The license had been voluntarily surrendered more than 2 years ago. The physician whose name appeared on my evaluation had retired and relocated to Scottsdale. She had not seen patients in New York in over 30 months and had never held clinical privileges at the institution named in the document's header. Fletcher had not simply hired a ruthless attorney, he had manufactured a medical record to take my daughter from me. I built a complete evidence binder the way I build every case file at work: exhibit number, primary source, date obtained, method of access, authentication reference. Public records went behind one tab, the NPI database printout went behind another, the LLC registration, the account transfers, the lease agreement, each one sourced, dated, and cross-referenced. By the time I closed the rings on the binder, the radiator had gone cold and the street outside was starting to lighten. At 7:10, my phone buzzed on the desk. Fletcher, voice message. I played it while I buttoned my blazer. "I hope you got some sleep," he said cheerfully. "Ridley is going to walk into that room and this is going to take 20 minutes. You can save both of us the time and sign the parenting plan today. Supervised visits on alternating weekends. Honestly, given everything, that's more than fair." A pause. "Don't embarrass yourself." I set my phone face down, picked up my binder, sent him a single text. "You filed a forged medical document, I filed a case." Then I walked out. Miriam was waiting for me at the courthouse entrance on Worth Street, wearing a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, her canvas tote over one arm, thermos in the other hand. She looked as though she had slept perfectly and eaten a real breakfast, which I resented in the most affectionate way possible. Fletcher was already in the hallway outside courtroom 7, with Ridley and his mother, who had arrived in the kind of fur-trimmed coat that announces itself before the person wearing it does. And Daphne was there, leaning against the far wall in a camel coat I recognized, because it had been a birthday gift to me a year and a half ago from my own mother. Around Daphne's neck on a delicate chain was a small oval locket, gold, engraved with a flower on the face. My grandmother had worn it every day for 40 years and pressed it into my hand in the hospital. It had been sitting in my jewelry box the last time I had access to the house. I stopped walking for 1 second. Miriam's hand came to my elbow. "Breathe," she said, very quiet. Fletcher noticed us. His expression moved from recognition to amusement in about half a second. He said something to Ridley and tilted his head in our direction, smiling the way people smile when they are absolutely certain they are watching something that cannot touch them. Ridley glanced at Miriam, the sensible shoes, the canvas tote, the thermos, and looked away. Inside courtroom 7, I took my seat at the petitioner's table alone. Miriam settled into the first row of the gallery directly behind me, hands folded on her tote. Fletcher and Ridley arranged themselves at the respondent's table with the practiced ease of people who had been in this room before and expected to be comfortable in it again. Judge Heston came in. Heavy-set, late 60s, a reputation for impatience with self-represented litigants so well established that even my online research had surfaced it. He looked at my table, and his expression said everything Fletcher's voicemail had implied. Ridley was on his feet before the routine formalities were finished. He submitted the psychiatric evaluation, a parenting plan, and affidavits from 3 of Fletcher's professional associates. Then he pivoted to address the court with the ease of someone managing a property they own. Your Honor, the petitioner has indicated her intent to submit financial records she characterizes as a fraud analysis. We have reviewed her materials. They include data she extracted by accessing the respondent's private business email account and proprietary LLC records without authorization. Under the Stored Communications Act and relevant precedent regarding unauthorized access to commercial accounts, this evidence is inadmissible in its entirety. I move to suppress it and ask the court to proceed on the record as submitted. Judge Heston was nodding before Ridley finished. He looked at me with the expression of someone offering patience they don't have. Do you have a response to that motion? I do, Your Honor, I said. I stood. My voice came out completely even, which genuinely surprised me, but I'd like to yield the floor to my advisor. The judge frowned. Advisor, you're listed here as self-represented. I am, I said. She's present in advisory capacity. From the gallery came the quiet sound of a canvas tote being set on the bench, and then the measured, unhurried sound of a woman rising. Miriam walked through the low gate into the well of the courtroom and crossed to stand beside my table. She moved without any urgency whatsoever, which somehow made everything else in the room go very still. Judge Heston looked down at her from the bench, and the color left his face. Not gradually, not in the slow way of someone putting something together. It left all at once. The way it does when a person opens a door and finds the thing standing on the other side is not what they expected, is not, in fact, anything they are prepared for. Judge Forsyth, he said. The formal booming voice he had used 60 seconds earlier had become something much smaller. I wasn't aware you were involved in this proceeding. Miriam Forsyth, 22 years on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Retired 4 years ago and currently serving as the sitting chair of New York's Commission on Judicial Conduct, the body with authority to investigate, sanction, and remove state judges for ethical violations. Gavin Ridley had studied her opinions in law school. He had cited her decisions in appellate briefs for 15 years. Ridley's hand went to the edge of the table and stayed there. Miriam settled into the chair beside me and removed one document from her tote. A federal appellate ruling, 2 passages highlighted in yellow. She handed it to the court officer. The motion to suppress rests on an expectation of privacy in a commercial account. That expectation is extinguished under established federal precedent when the account is actively used to commit fraud against a joint marital estate, which the petitioner had legal standing to examine under the terms of the existing separation agreement. I would also ask the court to note that the psychiatric evaluation submitted by the respondent cites a provider license number that has been surrendered for over 2 years. The petitioner holds documentation from the National Provider Index. The evaluation is not a clinical record, it is a fabricated document. The motion to suppress was denied in 80 seconds. The forged evaluation was referred for criminal investigation before the hour was out. Miriam requested that Fletcher take the stand. Ridley started to object and visibly stopped himself, because objecting in front of Miriam Forsyth when your client had just been caught submitting manufactured evidence was not a calculation any attorney's career could survive. Fletcher testified. He was collected for approximately 4 minutes. He used the word proactive. He described the LLC as a strategic financial vehicle. He claimed the transfers were investment activity that had always been intended to benefit the family. Then I asked him to confirm the name of the psychiatrist who had evaluated me. He confirmed it. I submitted the NPI printout, the surrender date, the relocation record, the absence of any clinical privileges in New York. Fletcher looked at Ridley. Ridley was looking at his legal pad with tremendous focus. Where did the LLC funds originate? I asked. The question sat in the air. Fletcher puffed his chest slightly, the instinct of a man who believes his own authority can still reshape a room, and said the money had been legitimately earned and that I had no understanding of how business investment actually worked. I pulled the account transfer logs, the dates, the structured amounts, the lease agreement with Daphne's name and the LLC listed as the funding source. Fletcher's jaw tightened, the chest deflated. You used marital assets to fund an apartment for someone else, I said. And when your company started doing well and you didn't want to share what we built, you filed a forged psychiatric report to take our daughter. So let me ask you directly, did you sign a document authorizing a forensic psychiatric evaluation of me at any point during our marriage? That's not, he started. Yes or no? The silence lasted long enough to be its own answer. Judge Heston's gavel came down. The custody order, full physical custody to me, supervised visitation contingent on the outcome of the criminal referral, was issued at 11:31 a.m. Fletcher's mother stood up and announced to the courtroom that this was an outrage and that she had friends in this building and that she would be making calls. The bailiff was beside her before she finished the second sentence. In the hallway, Daphne was already on her phone, crying quietly. When she saw me, she reached up without being asked and unclasped my grandmother's locket. She held it out in her palm. I don't think she knew its history. I think she simply understood that the ground under everything connected to Fletcher had just given way, and she was removing herself from the wreckage. I took the locket. I said thank you. My grandmother would have insisted on that. Miriam and I sat in a booth at a diner 2 blocks from the courthouse and drank coffee for 40 minutes. She told me she had known, on the train from the way I gathered and sorted her papers without being asked, that my mind worked the way hers did, building order, finding sequence, refusing to let a scattered record stay scattered. She said she had watched people underestimate that quality in courtrooms for 2 decades, and had never once seen it end well for the person doing the underestimating. Before we stood up, she slid a business card across the table. On the back she had written a name and a direct number. The managing partner of a federal investigations firm in Washington that specialized in government and judicial fraud. They have needed a senior investigator for the better part of a year, she said. I sent them a note last night after I reviewed your case file. I looked at her last night, while I was still building the binder. I read what you sent me, she said simply. That was enough. I called the number Monday morning. I had an offer letter by Wednesday evening, Senior Investigator, Federal Compliance Division, a salary that made my current position look like the undervaluation it had always been. I accepted before the week was out. My daughter came home on Saturday. She ran through the front door, bypassed me entirely, ran back, and then wrapped both arms around my waist and stayed there for a long time without saying anything. When she let go, she went to the kitchen table and spread out 16 drawings she had made for me during the weeks we'd been separated. Each one dated at the top in her careful printing, each one labeled with what it was a picture of in case I couldn't tell. The last one was a train at night, with a big yellow sun in the corner, because she said trains always need sun even when it's dark. And in the window there was a woman with brown hair and a brown rectangle that she told me was a briefcase. That's you, she said. You're going somewhere important. I pressed my grandmother's locket between my palms and looked at that drawing for a long time. She had no idea how right she was.